So the Apple M2 chips are certainly fast, but they're still based on the 5nm architecture, just like the M1 chip. But a lot of us have been excited for when Apple Silicon is going to be making that transition to the 3nm architecture, which is basically unheard of in the mobile computing space, and TSMC said that's going to launch in the second half of this year, and Apple's probably got first dibs on it. So let's talk about where to expect the M3 chip. So Mark Gurman's report has been detailing what the first Macs are going to be rocking the M3 chip, and he's been kind of on a winning streak lately. He was the one who I thought would be wrong about having the user's eyes on the outside of the Vision Pro display. I said, there's no way that's going to happen, and he ended up being right, so who am I to question the guy anymore? But he said Apple's planning to have an event in October, which may sound like a while away, but it's actually only like 3 months from now, so sooner than you'd think, where Apple's going to debuting 3 new Macs, all rocking the new and improved M3 chip based on the 3nm architecture. And it's kind of hard to predict what Apple's doing anymore. It's not like the same product release cycle as the M1 or the M2. He's claiming that the 3 Macs are one, a 24-inch iMac refresh, which is long overdue. That one makes sense to me. But the next two are kind of weird. The next one is a 13-inch MacBook Pro. Somehow, that thing is still rocking around and probably means the Touch Bar is going to survive another year, shockingly. And then the third and most bizarre one to me is a 13-inch MacBook Air is supposed to be rocking the M3 chip. And what's weird about his report is he makes no mention of the M3 chip coming to the 15-inch MacBook Air, which just launched like a month ago. Apple just dropped an M2 chip in a 15-inch MacBook Air, and you're telling me just like a couple of months later, then they're going to drop an M3 13-inch MacBook Air, so the lower-end, cheaper MacBook Air gets a faster chip with better battery life and better efficiency, but the 15-inch MacBook Air, which costs more, is going to be stuck with the M2 chip, which is more prone to thermal throttling and not as fast and still based on the 5nm architecture. Okay, when does the 15-inch Air get the M3? Does it get it next year? If so, that's a pretty fast refresh. You know, like, I would have thought that the 13-inch and 15-inch MacBook Airs would want to get refreshed together, you know, simultaneously, and personally, I would have been totally okay with them, like, kind of delaying the M3 chip for the MacBook Air series until later so that they can say, oh, well, you gotta pay this premium to get it in an iMac or to get it at least in the 13-inch MacBook Pro. That way, you know, the first 3nm Apple Silicon chips I'm sure are going to be much more expensive to build because it's a brand new architecture that hasn't really been scaled before. So put those in your higher margin products, right? Like the iMac and the MacBook Pro, and then put it in your cheaper products like the MacBook Air and the Mac Mini later on when you've scaled up production and you can afford to sell those chips in lower margin products in the future. Yeah, that's probably the hardest part to believe about this for me. The iMac, though, makes a lot of sense because Apple, at least in interviews, has said that they still care about the iMac. They still want to keep updating it, but it's literally like the one desktop on Apple's whole site that is still rocking an M1 chip. I hope they update the design language too because I am fed up with the white bezels and chin. Definitely don't think it serves the purpose of the iMac being a clean-looking, minimal all-in-one. I know everybody keeps expecting me to get over it, but you know what? The more and more I look at it, the more and more I hate it. But simultaneously, there's talks of Apple working on a larger-sized iMac. I'm not sure if that would debut at this October event. I'm guessing it won't. But this does kind of echo similarly the launch of the M1 chip in 2020, where they decided on 3 Macs, mostly that were not being redesigned in any way, just getting chip upgrades. So they just kind of, across the lineup, update a few chips with a higher improved efficiency and performance, and then call it a day. That seems like an Apple move to me. But I gotta admit, what's fascinating me the most is the idea that this 13-inch MacBook Pro is still sticking around, probably with a touch bar. You know, I would like to think that there's some rumor saying they're going to remove it and lower the price or something and turn it more into a MacBook SE that has a fan and really great performance, but just kind of the dated design language. But that's not included in this report. So my guess is, once again, there's just going to be this one touch bar MacBook Pro that happens to get the M3 chip, which means it's technically on a newer architecture than the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros. Really, really bizarre choice on Apple's part, but for those touch bar fans, I guess you get some love. And honestly, I was actually debating if this Mac might make sense for me in the future. Like, not because I'd be willing to go back to a 13-inch LCD display, but I was envisioning if in the future I'm rocking Vision Pro, and that kind of turns into my Mac display for most of my editing, that's going to be, you know, a micro OLED 90 hertz panel that I'm looking at all the time. Still pretty great compared to my mini LED MacBook Pro. And while yes, I prefer having the larger screen size of my MacBook, with Vision Pro I could have an infinitely larger screen screen. And like I said in the past, I love the touch bar, and I wish Apple would keep it as an option at least for these larger size MacBook Pros, because I would have been the guy to spend the extra $300 on the touch bar. I loved having it, but I understood most people didn't. That's why they got rid of it. But if in the future I could have an infinitely adjustable screen size with Vision Pro, and I could have my touch bar back, couple that with the concept that the M3 chip is going to get better performance, better efficiency, that may mean that the M3 MacBook Pro is able to get performance out of that M3 chip that might be pretty close or better than the performance in the M1 Pro chip. I think that's going to be a really interesting point where Apple starts getting entry-level chips faster than these entry model M1 Pro MacBooks. At that point, there's going to be less and less reason for people to opt for the 14-inch and 16-inch MacBook Pros, other than, I guess, the additional ports in the display. That would probably be the biggest thing I'd miss out on if I did end up switching to a touch bar MacBook in the future. I really don't care too much about MagSafe, but I do pretty routinely on my trips utilize the SD card slot, and if I'm at a hotel or something, I like being able to plug into a TV that's not mine and have HDMI. And of course, on top of all of that, the most important thing to me is being able to charge my MacBook from either side. I love plugging it in on the left or the right. Part of the reason I'm not a big MagSafe fan is I have to always charge it from one side, and I wouldn't get that if I went with the M3 MacBook Pro. I would save a lot of money if I end up replacing this 16-inch MacBook Pro in the future. I'm definitely going to try to make it last as long as possible, but in a future where I rely more heavily on spatial computing, it makes me wonder if I won't need to prioritize getting a larger sized MacBook in the future. But overall, if this report ends up being true, I feel kind of bad and apologetic towards those of you who bought the 15-inch MacBook Air. I feel like this is kind of awkward for you. A lot of you who spec'd it up have spent like $1,800, $2,000 on this machine, and then there's going to be a new MacBook Air just in a couple months with a way better chip. I hope that doesn't bother you. I hope the M2 chip is perfectly enough for you. But if you were waiting for an iMac refresh, that's the good news. I guess you won't have to wait too much longer, and I'm very excited to see what kind of performance gains we get out of this 3nm silicon. It will also probably be making its debut in the A17 chip in the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max series. So expect better battery life and better performance across the board, and let me know what you guys are most excited for in terms of Macs getting the M3 chip. I wonder how long it's going to take for the Mac Pro to get refreshed again. Is it going to be like 3-4 years before we get an M3 or an M4 Ultra? Feel free to let me know and speculate along with me down in the comments below. And thank you to everybody supporting this channel directly. Seriously, helps us out a ton, as does just watching these videos. This is your Apple Sheep here, and I will see you all in the next one.